Welcome to a new tutorial. In this one we're continuing with the chat application that we're busy building with Django Channels. In the last video we ended off with this demonstration where you can enter a room name and, for example, let's say test, and it'll ask us to log in. Once we ensure we're logged in, then it takes us to this page where we can see the messages that have been sent between participants in the chat. And in this instance I'm the admin user and this is the message I sent. And these are the messages that the other user sent, which was another super user. Now we ended off with a couple things that we noted we could improve on, such as bringing this into React, and I think that's just a better UI framework than just working purely out of JavaScript and using jQuery. And then secondly, there were a couple things that we could touch up, such as the ordering of the messages, adding timestamps, and just general improvements. So in this one, what we're going to focus on is bringing this application into React, so creating the chat UI in React, migrating our Websocket into React, and also introducing Parcel. If you've never heard of Parcel before, it's a new web application bundler which performs the same function as something like Webpack. Webpack is what is used in the Create React app package that's made by Facebook, but after discovering this Parcel bundler, I think this is definitely worth taking a look at, and after trying it out myself, I personally prefer this over Webpack way more. So we're going to take a look at how to implement this with React and migrating our application over into React. So let's get started. Right, so to get started, all you need to do is just go to our GitHub repository, the Just Chat application, and you can come to the commits here and actually just make sure that you're going to the right commit. So for example, right now this is tutorial 2, the name of the commit that I'm looking at right now, and you can copy this code here and just type in your terminal git reset -- hard and then the commit hash, and then that will take you back to the code that I'm starting with right now so that you can follow along with this. And so once you've done that, you can open that up in Visual Studio Code as I have right now, and we can get started. So normally if we were doing this with the Create React App package, then we would say something like Create React App and then the name of the actual application. But in this case, because we're not going to be using Webpack, we're not going to be using the Create React App either. So let's get started with creating a front-end directory. And so let's say make directory front-end, and then we will change into that. So you can see that's right here. And so to get started with Parcel, it's really the easiest thing. So all we do is we create an index.html file, and then any file inside that that's linked to it, such as a script file, is then automatically bundled. There's no file you need to create, no Webpack configuration sort of file. The only thing that we'll need to configure is Babel. So Babel will handle all of the JavaScript transpiling. Other than that, we're pretty much good to go. So inside the front-end directory, we'll just create index.html, and I'm just going to add an HTML5 boilerplate there, and we'll just add a script in here. Now, just to demonstrate Parcel quickly, you can just type console.log here, or something like that, inside the index.js file. And to install Parcel, all you have to do is, well, let's click on Get Started. And either with yarn or npm, you can install it. So like npm install -g Parcel bundler, -g makes it global so that you can do this anywhere, similar to the Create React App package. So once you've installed that, then you just need to create your package.json file. So you can quickly do this with npm init-y. And that basically just creates this default package.json file, and now you're pretty much good to go. So all you have to do is just say parcel index.html, run that, and now you can see that it's a server running at this host. So if I click to go there, now if I just inspect the page and we go to console, you can see here is being logged in the console because that's coming from index.js, and that really was it's up and running. So just to configure it with the last step with Babel, we're going to use the latest version, which is 7. So we just add a file here, which is babel.rc. And again, there's no configuration needed to tell Parcel where this file is. It's going to look for it by default. So in here, you just add your object, and you can start by adding the presets. and that's a list, and then we'll add the plugins, which is also a list, like that. Now we need to install the packages that will actually go inside here. And so here in the terminal, I'm just going to stop that, and we're going to say npm install -- save dev. So that will save it to the development dependencies. And this is going to be at babel/core. And then the next one is quite long, which I'm just going to copy in, which is this at babel/plugin proposal class properties. And then the last one is a React preset. So this one is at babel and then preset -react. So you just enter that, and it's going to install all those Babel dependencies. And then here inside the presets, we can come and add at babel/preset react. And in the plugins, then we add this really long one, which is just to help with recognizing our class properties, which is just some extra ES6 syntax stuff that we need to look at. So once you've got these two, then we're pretty much set up for React. So we can close that and we can get started with creating our React application. So what I'll do is inside the front end directory, I'm going to create a source folder. I'm going to move the index.js inside there. And we will also need to install React for that. So we'll say install, let's say -- save React, and we need React DOM. Cool. So if we were to take a look at the package.json file, you've got Babel core, Babel plugin proposal, and Babel preset React, as well as React and React DOM. So inside here, we can go ahead and import React from React. We can import React DOM, which comes from React DOM, and we can create ourselves an app class, which will just say extends from React.component, add a render method, which returns some JSX. We'll just say a div with hello, and we'll say export default. And actually, we might not even need to do that. We can go ahead and just say React DOM.render, and this is going to be the app component that we just created. And then we link it to a specific div in our index.html file, which we'll grab with document.getElementById, and we'll just say app as per usual. And that means in the index.html file, we can come in here, add a div, and add the ID as app. Right, so we can actually run our parcel index.html, but instead of doing that, we can add a script in the package.json file. So here inside the scripts, we'll just say start as the script name, and this will be parcel and then index.html. And then we can add a build script because we'll want to build the project at the end as well to bring it into Django. So we say parcel build index.html. Right, so now if you just want to run this project, then you just have to say npm start. And okay, so we're just getting that error there, which is the link to our index.html file. So we just say /source index.html, index.js that is, and then cool, there it is, it's running. We can go straight back to there, and let's just check if we've got any problems. So let's actually just close the server, run it again. And if we come back in here and refresh this, then we can see hello is over there. So that is all working. We've got React set up, and we can get going with migrating our HTML files here inside the chat templates directory. We can start moving over all of this stuff in here inside our new index.html file and inside here. Now, because we are such lazy programmers, I'm going to take all these links here and bring them into the index.html file just like that. Instead of referencing the static there, I'll just get rid of that right there. And I'm going to reference the style as /source assets style.css. And then inside source, I'll create assets, and then we'll have style.css, which we'll then take from our static folder. I'm going to grab everything from that static file, paste it in there. And now we're linking our CSS and all of these other files to get the necessary styling that we need. I'm not going to really focus on making it the most perfectly styled application. It's more just to get it to work for the time being. I'm going to add that in, and then I'm also going to add the script here at the bottom in index.html, I think it is. It should be room.html, which is referencing the main.js. So let's go to main, and everything inside here, I'm going to copy that and bring into the index.html, and then add a script and paste all of that inside there. Then what we can also do is just add some style here to the div, and I'm just going to set the width as 100%. And if we check if that's working, that's all good for now. So we've linked everything in there. We've got the div ID app, and we've got our app that's being rendered to there as well. So inside the source directory, we can then create a containers folder, and in there we can have our chat.js file, and this is pretty much going to be what we have here in the room.html. So everything inside our div with the ID of frame. So I'm just going to minimize that and copy it, and we're already using everything else, so we won't have to worry about that, except for migrating all of this practically into a React format. So we're not going to copy it directly because it's going to be quite different, but the principle will remain the same. So I'm just going to close that, and inside here I'm going to start by saying import React from React, and then I'm going to come and create a class here which will just say chat, which extends from React component, render return, and at the bottom we'll say export default chat, and I'm just going to paste everything inside there in the return statement. Then we can also get rid of the comment list items inside our unordered list there, and we can get rid of the username because we don't have that right now, so we'll just put username there, and seems like everything is okay. Let's check if it's working. It's still built, so if we come in here and refresh this, then we've got our nice green background, which will go away in a second. Let's import the chat component here into index, so that from our containers, and we will render that right here. So chat. Now let's take a look, and there we go. Cool. So this is pretty much what we had last time, except we don't have any messages, we don't have any WebSocket connected, and we've got a bunch of stuff that we need to convert into React, such as this class name. So let's get started with that. I'm just going to search for class, replace it with class name, and then this first one I'm just going to change back to class. And if we come back, we've also got this for property, and we've also got a value for form. So what I'll do is search for and change this to HTML4, save that, and now we also have the value prop. So that is all of this stuff here, and just to focus mainly on the chat itself, what I'm going to do is take out the side panel, and inside containers I'm just going to add this side panel directory, and then add side panel.js, paste all of that there. Or actually, before we do that, we'll just import React from React, and for the time being we can just say this is a constant, so side panel, and we don't need extends then, so there, and we'll give it props and return all of that. Then we can just tab that in a little bit, and then just say export default side panel, which we can come back in here and just import it. So import side panel from side panel, and that comes right underneath the div with an ID of frame, and we can tab that in a little bit as well. So if we come back in, then this should all be the same, and it is, but I'm just going to come in here and comment out all of those labels and inputs because I don't want that error showing in the console all the time, just so we focus on this. Cool. So everything has been migrated in terms of how it looks. So that's at least a good first step, but now we need to focus on connecting this to a WebSocket. And so the easiest way I've found to do this is by creating a WebSocket file. So inside the source directory, I'll just create websocket.js, and in here we're going to create a class which will be our WebSocket. So I'm just going to say class WebSocket service. Straight away I'm going to start with a constructor, and a constructor is very similar to the init method on a Python class. It's basically saying that when this class is being created, then you do some stuff inside the constructor to initiate the class. So what I'm going to do is set the socket reference equal to null. And the guidance for creating this I'm going to link in the description of the video. This is definitely the best thing I've found. So I'm just going to walk you through this in a slightly customized way. So basically what this constructor is doing is it just sets the socket reference as one of the properties on the class to null, and then we can change that later. Then some extra fields on the class I'm going to add here are the instance. So we say static instance. It's best to explain this purely just by Googling it and reading the definition here. So it says the static keyword defines a static method for a class. Static methods aren't called on instances of the class. Instead, they're called on the class itself. They're often utility functions, such as functions to create or clone objects. And this is basically to ensure that we actually have an instance of the WebSocket service. That was the whole point of creating this instance property, so that we ensure that we actually have a working connection. And then again, we'll say static get instance, which similarly is checking if we have an instance or not. So what we do is we say if there's no WebSocket service.instance, then we'll just say WebSocket service.instance equals to a new WebSocket service, just like that. And then we just add that there and return the WebSocket service instance. So it's just a short, convenient method to ensure that we actually do have an instance of the class, so a copy of this object. And then below here we'll add the callbacks, which is a dictionary, and right now it's empty, but what we're going to do is add callbacks to it when we initiate the service. And those callbacks are going to be things like the fetch messages command we saw in the last video and the new message command. So now I'm just going to create some other methods. The first one intuitively being the connect method. And in here, what we do is we connect to the actual WebSocket. So we're familiar with this stuff here. So I'm just going to say this path is WebSocket and then the local host of the Django server /ws/chat, and then the name of the chat room for now I'm just going to set as test. And then what we do is we'll set the socket reference equal to a new WebSocket. So remember how we used a reconnecting WebSocket? Well, now I'm using just a normal WebSocket, and we pass the path, which is just the WebSocket path on the URL on the server. And so we're just going to connect to that and set it equal to the socket reference. And that way we can access it when we're creating our own instance of this class. And then here we're just going to set the methods on the WebSocket. So I'm going to say socket reference dot on open. So see the prompts here, you get on close, on error, on message, and on open. So we'll set on open to its own method. And in here I'm just going to say console.log WebSocket open. Then we'll also say this dot socket reference dot on message, which equals to an event taking place. And here we'll actually comment this out for now. We'll say this is sending a message. So we'll take care of that method in a second. Then we have the on error, which also takes an event taking place, and we'll say console.error, or in fact we can log out the error just so we avoid crashing. So we'll just say e.message, so we just display the message from the error. And then lastly, socket reference on close, which takes no parameters, and we'll just say console.log WebSocket is closed and reconnected. So this dot connect. So it's actually kind of like its own reconnecting WebSocket, which is quite convenient. So now this sending a message method here, we're going to take care of that. So below the connect method, we're going to add another method here, which we'll call the socket new message. And that's going to take in some data. We'll say the past data equals to json.parse that data. So this is just to read it as a JSON. This is just so that we can read it because it's coming in a JSON form. So we're just going to read it as an object. And once we have that, then we can say the command equals to the past data dot command. And this command is, again, something like fetch messages or new message. So we're just grabbing that command and we're going to determine if the command is a normal messages, then we're going to handle all those messages coming through. If it's a new message, then we're going to handle that new message. So exactly what we did last time. But now we're also going to add a little convenience method here to check if we don't have any callbacks, then we mustn't do anything because we can't handle it. Otherwise that'll just raise an error. So we say if object.keys, and this is to get all the keys on an object, then we're going to pass in the callbacks, which we specified up here. Remember, this is already an empty dictionary. So if it is an empty dictionary, then it's going to have no commands that can take place. So what we do is just say, if the length is 0, meaning we don't have any commands, then just return. So basically do nothing. Otherwise, we will say if the command equals to messages, then we're going to handle a callback function, which is specified inside our callbacks. So we specify the command in there and then pass in the argument of the command, which is the past data dot messages. And messages would be a list of messages that are coming through on this specific command. Otherwise, if the command equals to new message, meaning we just sent one message by itself, then I'm going to say this dot callbacks of that command and pass in the same thing, pass data, but now it's the single message that's come through. So that's pretty simple. Then there's another method that we're going to add on here, which is the fetch messages method, and then we'll also add the new message method as well. So here I'm going to say this takes in a username, and I'm going to say this dot send message, which we'll define in a second, and it's going to take in an object. The first key is going to be the command, and that is fetch messages. Then we're going to pass in the username, which is username, just like that. And I'm going to just copy that whole method, paste it there, and we'll just rename this to new chat message, which will take a message. Then the command is going to be a new message. Then we need to also specify the from, which is like the author, and that is going to be message.from, and the actual message itself, which is message.content, for example, and we'll pass all of that in as a message object when we get to it. Then I'm going to add a convenient method here, which is the add callbacks method, and this we're going to specify on the class, on the chat that is. So we'll access the WebSocket and then we'll add the callbacks manually. So we'll say the first one is the messages callback, the second one is the new message callback, and in here what we're essentially doing is we're adding the callback methods into our dictionary. So we're saying this dot callbacks of messages equals to the messages callback. So the first callback being passed into this add callbacks method. And then the second one is the new message command that's being passed in, and that is the new message callback. So basically we're going to pass in the names of the functions to actually be called when these callbacks take place, or these commands are taking place. And we've only got two more methods left on the class. This first one is the send message, and this is pretty simple. We're just going to try to send something, and if we get an error, we'll catch it and just say catch any errors and say console.log the error message. Otherwise, in here we're going to use the socket reference and send our data. So we'll say this dot socket reference dot send, and here we need to stringify our object so that it is a JSON object. So we call json.stringify, and we pass in our object, which we're going to access the spread off of. So we say dot 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 data, so that we are grabbing all the parameters and creating a shallow clone of the data that's coming in there. And so this is the send message that we referred to up here, where we're now passing in this as the object there and this as the object there, and those will just be stringified and sent in this method. And then lastly, this method is going to basically ensure that we wait for the connection to be steady. So we're going to call this the wait for socket connection method, and this also takes a callback as a parameter. So first we'll grab the socket from the reference, so we'll say this dot socket reference and set it equal to our socket, and we'll also say the recursion is equal to this dot wait for socket connection. So this meaning the class itself, the entire class, reaccessing this method on the class. Now what we do is we set a timeout, which is going to call a function, and this is basically an anonymous function. Second parameter here is the timeout, which is in seconds, or milliseconds rather. So I'm just going to pass 1 in like that. In here we're basically checking if our socket has a ready state of 1, meaning if it is connected, then it will have a ready state of 1. So to do this, we just say if socket.readyState equals 1, so we are connected. Then we will say console.log connection is secure, and we'll say if the callback is not equal to null, so meaning we didn't pass in a callback here, then we will call the callback. Otherwise we will just return. We say else, meaning there is no steady state here or ready state. Then we'll say console.log waiting for connection, and after that then we can say recursion of the callback. So this basically ensures that this method is continuously called thanks to the set timeout until we are connected. Once we're connected, then it will stop. And so the last thing to do after all of that was to grab our unique WebSocket instance. So we say our instance equals to WebSocket service dot get the instance. So remember this method up top here, that's to actually get an instance of this service, and then we will export the default from this file as that service, or that instance rather. So we export that and we bring it here into our chat. So I'm going to say import WebSocket instance from, then we need to go back to the WebSocket, and there we go. Now here on the chat, we're going to add a constructor as well, and this is going to take in props. Then all we do is just call the super command, which is just basically something we need to pass in to make the constructor work. And I'm going to add the state as an empty dictionary. This is common practice before React 16, where you actually had to do this. Now you don't have to, you can just grab the state and paste it right there, but we'll just add it in the constructor. And what I'm going to do is say this dot wait for socket connection, which is something we're going to pass here as a method on the class. And so we'll say wait for socket connection, which takes in a callback. And this is very similar to what we just did in the socket, where we created this timeout to wait for the socket connection. So what I'm actually going to do is grab the entire method here, and we will just paste it right there, except now we don't have a socket reference. So I'm going to say the component equals to this, meaning the chat itself. Then we set a timeout where we're passing in a function, and we just check if the instance, so this instance up here, we check if the instance dot state equals to 1. And so just to add this method onto the WebSocket as a convenience method, we'll call state here and just say return this dot socket reference dot ready state. So that way we check if the state of the socket is equal to 1, meaning it's secure. Then we'll say connection is secure, call the callback. And so I'm just going to paste that like that. Otherwise, we are waiting for the connection, and we'll call here component dot wait for socket connection, passing in the callback. And then over here, I'll just add 100 as the milliseconds that we need to wait. And so in here, we'll just add an anonymous function where we will use the WebSocket instance, and on there we will add the callbacks. So we'll say add callbacks, and we'll pass in the methods that we'll add as callbacks. So the first one being set messages, and we'll say dot bind to this. And if you remember here in the WebSocket, we've got the add callbacks. The first one is the messages callback. So that's what we're doing. We're setting the messages. And then the second callback is the new message callback. So there we add the second one. And this will just say this dot add message dot bind this. So now we've added the callback methods to take place on those commands that we'll receive. And then lastly, we will add WebSocket instance dot fetch messages and pass this dot props dot current user, which won't be working for now, but we'll get to it eventually. So that is the constructor, and we've got our connection. Now we need to add our set messages and add message method. So we'll say set messages, which takes in messages, and we'll say this dot set the state. We'll pass in a dictionary there, and we'll say the messages, and this is just going to be the messages that's being passed into the method, but we're going to say dot reverse, so that we actually reverse the order of those messages that's coming through. And that was one of the problems that we had at the end of the last video. That is the set messages method. Now we can add the add message method. So we'll do that above here. And this takes in a message. And in here, we'll also set the state. We will pass in a dictionary, and we'll say that the messages equals to a list, where we'll access the spread operator to create a clone of the already existing messages in the state, but then pass in the new message that we just added as well. So that's the add message method. And if we take a look, everything seems to be okay for now. We don't have any serious issues. But now we'll also need to take a look at here in the room.html that we used to have. So we've created the fetch messages. We've got the add message method, but we don't have this create message, which basically created the item that we would add into our list of messages. And so that's what we need to do here now. We're going to create a method here, which we'll call the render method. So render messages. And this is going to take in some messages and basically just return a list item. So a list of list items, which we will render inside the unordered list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the current user equal to admin, and that is just so that we have a username that can be accepted on the server side. Then here we'll just return the messages, but we're going to map them into a list of new components. So for every message, we're going to do the following. So we're going to return a list item, and this list item inside here has to be the same as what it was here. We added an image and we added a paragraph. Then we set the source equal to this link here. So I'm going to copy that, and for every item in a list of items that we're mapping out, we need to specify the key. So let's go and add the key here, and this is just going to be the message ID, which we'll pass in a second. Then we're going to add the class name, and after that, inside the list item, I'm going to add the image, where I'll specify the source as that URL, and then we'll add the paragraph tag, which will have the message content. And so here for the class name, what I'm going to do is check if the author of the message is the same as our current user. So just by saying message.author equals to the current user, then we'll say the class name is sent. Otherwise, we'll say it is replies. And that'll just ensure that the message displays on the right side of the chat. But again, we're not really handling authentication just yet, so it's not going to work just exactly how we want it. And then what I'm going to do quickly is go into the consumer, which is here inside the chat app. And if we go down here to the message to JSON, I'm going to pass in the ID, which will just be message.id. So that we're actually passing that in, and then the key will actually have an ID to grab onto. So now here inside the render method, I'm just going to say the messages equals to this.state.messages. And if we come down here into the unordered list, we'll output this dynamically. Here we'll do the messages and we'll say, and this dot render messages, and pass in the state messages. So that way we're calling this method and we will return all our list items based on the messages that are coming through. So let's actually take a look at this now. If we come here and refresh this, then if we inspect, it seems we don't have any errors just yet. But if we type something out and then enter, okay, so this is actually the Django server. So let's go to the local host here, and if we refresh this, then we get this ready state of null error here. And the reason for that is because in our index.js we actually haven't called anywhere for the connect to take place. So here in the WebSocket we have this connect method, but we haven't called it at all. And so we can actually handle that here in the index.js. So here I'm going to add the component didMount method, and we'll import our instance of the WebSocket service as well. So WebSocket instance, which is from WebSocket, and we'll just say .connect, just like that. So now let's come back in here, and now you can see waiting for connection. So for the time being, we keep getting this waiting for connection, and the reason for that is because we just need to add a slash here on the end of our path. So if we do that and come back in and refresh, now you can see it's opening and it's got a secure connection. So that's all working, and you can see it here in the server as well. But what we want to do now is actually handle those messages actually coming through, because you can see we didn't reload those messages, or we didn't actually receive them in the first place. And that's because we haven't handled it here in our onMessage receiver, as well as we haven't actually told the server to send us those messages. We haven't actually called the messages command. So what we need to do here is we have to say this.socket new message, so the method here that we created, to actually handle that data. So we say e.data. And then lastly, right above that, I'm going to say this.socket new message. So I'm actually calling it here as soon as we've connected. And I'm going to say json.stringify. So we stringify an object, and all the object is going to say is the command, and the command is fetch messages. And we actually won't even need to put that in quotes. So basically sending out the command to fetch those messages. And so if we come back in here, now it is working and those messages are being actually fetched and loaded. So there you go, you can see that that's working. So that is the first part of migrating it into React. We've got the component actually working, we've got the WebSocket working, we've got the fetch command working, and it seems we don't have any major issues or errors besides this one here, which is coming from Bootstrap. But other than that, we don't have any component issues, which is really good. And so now what we need to do is just finish this off by handling the creating of a message. So if I just come in here and type something and click enter, nothing's happening, and that's because we haven't hooked that up to an actual event sender and then also the change handler. So that's going to come down here to this div here. So what I'm going to do is wrap all of this inside a form. So we'll just say form, and I'm going to take that whole div there, paste that in there, and I'll specify the onSubmit equal to a method, which we'll just call the send message handler. So there you've got the div, we've got this button here, and the button is going to be the submit button, and then the input we also need to change as well. So we're going to need to add a couple things here. The first one is the on change. The second one is the value. So the value is simply just the state message. So the message there. And then here we'll say the start message change handler. So we'll just grab those two there, copy them, and we'll come up here to handle those. So the message change handler is very easy. That one just takes in an event, and all we do in here is just set the state where we change the message to be the event target value. So that will basically just grab the value of the input and set it equal to the message inside the state, and that happens every single time you type inside the input. And then the actual send message handler takes in an event as well. First we'll say event.prevent default so that the form doesn't reload the page, and then I'm going to create the message object, which is what we'll actually send on the instance. So we'll create the object like this. We'll specify from as admin, and we'll specify the content as the state.message. Then here I'll just say Websocket instance.new chat message and pass in the message object, and then set the state where we'll change the message value back to an empty string. That way it looks like you've actually submitted the form, but the page didn't need to reload. We just removed everything from the input. So if we go back to this new chat message, then here you can see it, this method on the WebSocket. We've got this.send message, and we've got the command, which is a new message. So that's not actually a parameter that you need to pass in. Then you've got the from parameter or from key, which is the message.from, which is what we passed in here, this from. And then message is the content, where the content is that there. So now if we check everything's working, it is, and let's just refresh this. So now if I say testing, then you can see that that went there, and we actually created the new message. If I reload the page, the message is still there. Cool. So now all of that is working. The messages are going through, but what we could also do is add one more thing to the message, which will make it look a little bit better. So if we come here to the render messages, right here we can add a break statement, and we can add a small tag which can have the timestamp of the message, and we're already sending that in the consumer. So inside there, what we basically want to do is we want to grab the date, or rather the timestamp that came on the message, and that was simply just message.timestamp. So that's how we would access that, and we could just make that dynamic. So that would look like that. If we came back, you could see this is what it looks like, but that's not really helpful in any way. So what I'm going to do is first let's create some space there. So we can create a new date object from this, and we can subtract this from a new date from right now. But to get the actual time in milliseconds, we just say .get time. So like this. So now you can see we've got new date .get time minus new date of the timestamp .get time. Now if you come back in here, you get this in milliseconds. So all you need to do now is just divide this by 60,000 to get it into minutes. So let's wrap this in some curly braces there, divided by 60,000, and we get this in minutes. But we can just round this as well. And now if we come back, now you can see that this was 3. So let's add some text there, 3 minutes ago. There we go. So we got a little bit of a timestamp there, and yeah, you could probably create a method here on the class to handle the display of the timestamp, and basically say that once it goes over 1 hour or 60 minutes, then display it in hours and not in minutes, because it's ridiculous to say that something was 6,000 minutes ago. So that's just an introduction to that. And so we've got our messages displaying, we've got the messages sending, everything's working, and I'm going to end the tutorial here on this note because it has been quite a long one. But just to sum everything up, we used Parcel to do all of this, and all we did was specify the Babel RC file where we had a preset for React and a plugin to handle class properties, and then set up our Parcel script in the package JSON file here. And so all of that basically bundled everything here for us. We didn't need to configure any Webpack or use the Create React app, which is really cool. Then we created our Websocket, which has all these methods on it to handle connecting to the WebSocket and handle sending new data, receiving it, actually handling the callbacks. So all of that was very handy. Then we created the chat, which referenced the WebSocket itself. We added the callbacks to handle specific commands. We've got this nice little waiting for the socket connection callback, which is this timeout that is checking every 100 milliseconds to ensure that we do have a connection. And then the rest of these methods here are just to handle sending the message and receiving the message. And so anything above and beyond this would really just be branching into React itself. And I don't think that's 100% the point. It's more to show how we can connect this to Django channels, and we've managed to actually do that. So one thing that isn't good right now is the fact that if we were to send these messages and open an incognito window and then try it from there as well and talk to ourselves, we are still going to get the messages on the same side because we've defined our current user as the admin user. And that is a problem. What we want to do is we want to store the username in the state or local storage and then use that as the username in our application. So something to think about is how we can add authentication in the upcoming videos. And we've actually handled this in our Django React series, specifically showing you how you can set up authentication between the two. I'm not 100% sure if we'll implement it exactly like how we did in that tutorial, but do check out that video to see how to do it anyway. I think what we'll most likely do is something a little bit more trivial where we just input the username and then continue from there. So in the next video, we'll touch up on a few small things like that, specifically the authentication, and see if we can also get these links here on the side in the side panel here to be like our different channels that we can connect to. That's what we'll be handling in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below to let us know what you thought, and if you have any other ideas or things that you want to see in this tutorial series. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.